if you're just if you're just getting a bunch of different animals and getting two of some and you're kind of breeding indiscriminately, you're gonna encounter issues for your long-term population and housing them all, feeding them all, and like that's how you end up kind of indiscriminately culling. So I think that that idea is just a not strong one for long-term effectiveness either.
Okay. I agree. Who's ne Ryan's next, I think. Yeah, Ryan.
I think Bjorn was in front of me.
Oh, okay. My bad. Bjorn, I wasn't trying to skip you, bud. Go ahead.
Um, I was just gonna say, I don't know if anybody made this point. I kind of came in a little bit late to this question, but one thing that also bothered me about that stamp collection perspective was it completely ignored just the basic biology of the animal. Like, what if that's a very social animal? What if that's an animal that lives in packs? What if you need a larger collection to actually maintain, good welfare for that animal? And I feel like the stamp collection just kind of completely eliminates that from the conservation conversation.
Okay. I agree. Um, and then wait, who was it? Someone was it Ryan?
It was me. He kind of said what I was thinking. The book also referenced the kind of Noah's Ark of having one male, one female. And I think I maybe misunderstood what stamp collection was because I thought that meant like at the time they were like, oh, just get one male and one female and we'll make more. And that entire idea obviously like doesn't work. I know specifically primates, you often need a social dynamic for a male to even breed with any of the females. If it's one male with multiple females versus one male with one female, they likely won't breed. So um, I kind of thought the stamp collection was just silly, but yeah.
Yeah, this yeah. Um, so I agree with basically everything you all just said. I think those are all really good points. I would, just for the sake of looking at the other side of the coin, throw out maybe one argument that the other side of the coin might make. And so someone that liked this idea might say, well, I've created this tremendously diverse collection, and that attracts many more visitors than your much narrower collection does. And I take that money from those ticket sales and I pump that into conservation in other places. And I'm able, because of that, to contribute more monetarily to conservation efforts than you are. So what I'm doing is actually better. How do you feel about that, Tiffany?
So, as a zookeeper and working as a collection manager, where are those animals coming from? If you have all these animals, not all of them are being housed in captivity at this point. In fact, it's very well known that very few species are actually held in captive management. So, yes, you might have all of these animals, but how did you get them? Where did they come from? Are they actually, do you know how to care for them? Um, is your collecting them also then harming the wild population? And how can you prove that you having it in a captive setting isn't going to convince other people that they should go and get it too? Which is always an argument for zoos in general, is making sure we're not convincing others that they're worth keeping. But I can think specifically of like reptiles and amphibians that so many of them are still being wild caught because we just don't know how to propagate them in human care. We're still learning about how to care for them. They're kind of on the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to care management. So that would be my biggest worry is, well, how did you get them? Was it legal? For one thing. Um, are they diseased? Are they going to spread disease? Things like that. But especially large mammals, that would be terrifying if they're just somehow getting large animals without people worried about that.
That's great, Tiffany. That's a great retort to someone that says that. I th we are going to talk about sourcing animals a bit later in the semester and the ethical implications of doing that. There are some serious problems, even in modern and really good zoos, with where some animals come from. It's highly problematic. So we will discuss that more later in the semester, but it's a really good point you made. Caitlin, you raised your hand and then took it away. I don't know if that was you don't feel like talking now kind of thing or
I did. I feel like my point on that gets into like a really big theme in zoos. So your like other side of the coin argument is like I have all these animals, maybe they're not the best cared for potentially, or I'm not meeting all their needs, but I'm generating a lot of money. I think that gets into a common argument within zookeeping is like the welfare of the individual versus the welfare of the population. Some people are much more willing to negatively impact an individual if it positively impacts a larger population, whereas other people don't want to do that and always want to look at making sure every individual has great welfare. So I feel like your other side of the coin would be, we care less about the individual and we should be doing more for the whole population.
yeah, and you're right. That's a big topic, one that I think we will see reflected in many points of discussion if you guys hit on it at different points this semester. It is 4 till 8, so I think we're going to take our first break right now. It take like let's come back at f 5 after. That's like 9 minutes. Get up and stretch and do whatever other things you've got to do, and then we'll come back and we'll continue. Okay. Okay. So we just finished, was that question 8? I think we'll skip question 9 as well. Well, we'll just do sort of, actually 9, 10, and 11 are all really tied together. So let's talk about these all as one thing. So the question 9 is, what question troubled zoo managers of the Zoological Society of London in 1826? And then what was the goal of the Kensington Farm? This was associated with the Zoological Society. And then what ultimately was the result of the failure of the Kensington Farm? So let's just talk about all of that together. Well, I mean, who can tell me what questions, what were the big questions of zoo managers at the Zoological Society of London? We'll just start there. So there's a couple people I still have not heard from in the first hour. You're going to want to, at some point tonight, make sure you contribute or you will not get points for being here. Annabeth.
So some of the questions that they asked was what animal species would they include?
Mm.
How many of each species? Would there only be wild animals or would they include domesticated animals? And would they be monitoring would they monitor breeding for the genetics?
Good. Yeah.
Those are some of the questions. That's question 9.
Yep. And they had established, from that list of questions in question 9, certain goals, um, sort of reaching out and teaching the public about these animals, and pleasing the public, basically making the public happy that they were there and existed, um, giving effort to scientific research, and also introducing new animals as well. So, yeah, great. So to do that, they have basically they have this little zoo, but they find out pretty quickly that the little zoo that they have is not really going to function for propagation of animals, right? That's sort of the basis. And so what comes out of that? What's the result of that?
They started the Kingston farm. They kind of moved everyone to the farm where they had more space and started, breeding, experimenting with productivity, and continued looking at hybridization. And a lot of that I feel like was completely revolving around the food industry and agriculture as well. They just wanted to see, what resources those animals could provide. And by hybridizing, they wanted to see if, the resulting hybrids were better in some way um, than the other animals that they were working with. And yeah.
Yeah, the Kensington Farm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, where they emphasized an agricultural sort of focus, and breeding research was a primary focus and at that time. Now that farm failed. Cleo, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say too, with that farm, it like offered more space for them, and then there was fewer distractions, which was thought to also help increase the breeding strategies and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, and the space was the reason for the move, right? They simply did not have the space at the initial at the society's zoo space that they had established. They didn't have the physical space to do what they wanted to do. They had tiny spaces, and they were trying to breed these animals, and it just wasn't working. Ryan?
Hi. So I also noticed with the Kensington farm that it was also like reported and described more as a retreat for stressed out animals. And I don't think that they were really publicizing the research and the experiments, and the stuff that they were doing with animals behind scenes. I wonder what that looked like at the time, which made me think that maybe they knew that they were doing something a little bit iffy, because they were telling people it was, for the benefit of the animals when they were doing more behind scenes. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't have a lot, I think, of perspective on that I can give. I think you're insinuating they were doing some shady stuff and trying not to let people maybe know they were doing some shady stuff. Is that right?
Shady, or also just not like being completely transparent about what it was that they were doing. And I think that gave a sense of they knew they were doing something shady. I don't know if they really were, like, I mean, research at the time I'm sure was, compared to today, shady, but I just thought it was interesting that they were reported as, kind of a sanctuary, but they were actually doing more than just that.
Okay, yeah. So you bring up a good point, another point that I think we'll hit on perhaps multiple times this semester, but something we can talk about for a few minutes here. You were essentially saying they're like obfuscating the reality of the situation. There's an outward face and an inward reality to this space. Is that true of zoos today?
If we're still asking me, I feel like today zoos are sort of held to an accountability, or held to accountability, and that they kind of have to be transparent about a lot of things. Now, that's speaking for zoos today, AZA zoos. That's not talking about, smaller, more private zoos and stuff like that, where they don't have to share what they're doing. So it most definitely could be something that is definitely relevant today. But I will say that most well-known or good zoos, quote unquote good zoos, are a bit more transparent with what they are doing with research and scientifically.
Okay. Well, Tiffany.
That's a very American perspective because there are definitely zoos across the pond and other continents that, from the outside, definitely look like they're doing okay. But probably on the inside, from our viewpoint, we have no idea what's going on behind the scenes, especially when it comes to where their animals are coming from, I think tends to be a big aspect. But also, there are still animals we would like to bring into captivity that we still have no idea how to properly care for them. So, in whatever way you want to think of things being shady, we have to figure out how to care for them somehow. And sometimes that leads to massive deaths, and really unfortunate situations that, yes, we can say, oh, we're doing the best for the animal and all that stuff, but from a layman's point of view, doesn't always look the best.
Yeah. Taylor.
I thought it was kind of interesting to say that even if it's an AZA zoo, there's transparency there. Because when I worked at Woodland Park Zoo, which is like a pretty well known AZA zoo, known for the conservation, taking great care of animals, I worked in the butterfly exhibit, and I mean, the lifespan of a butterfly is maybe about 2 weeks. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
they died a lot, right? Like a big
Yeah.
part of my job is like collecting them. But some people would see them, on the decline, and we would scoop them up and bring them into a separate room, and we would tell them that they'd be going to the butterfly hospital. A lot of it was kids. This is kind of how we describe it. However, the reality of this butterfly hospital that we had was that we'd put it in like this little, container, glass enclosure. And I wasn't a zookeeper there. I was just an exhibit attendant, but zookeepers that special in the insect department were supposed to come and like feed them and then humanely euthanize them. But a lot of the time they never showed up and they just died in there. Like they were supposed to have food in there. It was not provided. Just kind of poor quality, honestly. And this is at like an accredited zoo, right? Like this is at a zoo that's like supposed to be known as being like transparent and things like that. That's held up to these standards. And I feel like even then it's not necessarily being met. And I mean, what can you expect for organizations or zoological institutions that don't have these, regular checks and things like that?
Yeah, I'm really glad, Taylor, that you brought up the butterfly garden type thing because that is a situation we will talk about later in this semester. It is exactly this conversation that we'll be having again, I think, um, where the the face is not the reality of the situation. So it's a really great point. Um, uh, Tiffany, you have something you want to follow up from Taylor's comments?
Along with butterflies, aviaries have very nice looking faces, and then behind the scenes, there's birds that got stepped on, one that got grabbed by a kid, one that got kicked. As someone who worked in a budgie aviary,
Oh, yeah.
that was all I did was telling, oh, it's okay, we're gonna take it, it'll be seen by the vet, and its insides are on its outsides. That's another place, but I also want to mention, again, with the AZA kind of thing, a lot of that stuff, it seems transparent, but actually isn't. A lot of stuff happens behind the scenes. And while, yes, accreditations are generally made public, there are things like inspections and things like that, which are kept behind the scenes. And while a lot of places like to publicize it and say, oh, we did great, you don't know if they did poorly unless they actually lose accreditation. So just because it says it's transparent doesn't mean it has to be transparent. Just because they say things doesn't make it true.
Absolutely. The if you just think about even at the most honest level of a zoo, okay, let's just say this perfectly honest zoo. Let's imagine it doesn't exist, but let's say it does. It's my zoo. I'll be perfectly honest with people. The face of the zoo still belies the nature of what happens in the back. No, like the way birds are kept in the back, for example, is not in like the big walk-through aviary, right? They're in little tiny cages, for example. So, or like, well, the people that work here on campus, certainly people like Bjorn and Annabeth and Cleo and Jasmine, um, they know that the same is very true for reptiles, right? That nice big reptile enclosure that thing is moving around in that's beautifully decorated and that people are seeing. Uh, Bjorn, what do they keep? You worked with all sorts of. You worked at a reptile zoo. Yeah, what do they keep your reptiles in? Did they all have nice, big, beautiful enclosures?
No.
Yeah. What were
Definitely
they in,
not.
Bjorn?
So Tiffany knows this, but for
Okay.
everybody else, I worked at Kentucky Reptile Zoo. And they call it a reptile zoo, but it's really a venom lab. We have a really, really large collection of venomous snakes there that we use for like venom extractions and stuff like that. So we do have exhibits that are pretty much like all snakes. We had very few like other reptiles there, but then we had a ton of other snakes there that were housed in like rack systems. So we didn't have just like, one Najin Indian cobra on display. We had, 24 of them for venom extractions. But I think I'm also kind of in a unique situation because I've worked at two zoo facilities, but both of them were non-for-profits. And so, of course, we also had we ran into the situations as well, like, oh, the snake hospital situation, or, just trying to diffuse situations. But in general, um, in these small non-for-profits, like everything was kind of open for the public to see. Like when we did venom extractions, that was in the building where the snakes were being kept. So when people would view those, they would, view the buildings. And, the same thing at the other facility I worked at that actually like specialized in wolves. But what the public viewed, that was like our space. There wasn't like we didn't have, a back area where there was like sketchy stuff going on. Um, but we definitely got a lot of feedback and mixed opinions on the rack systems and housing snakes that way, for sure.
Yeah, and we could talk about rack systems. I'm not trying to insinuate that rack systems are bad, and it's actually really cool that in your particular circumstance people could see them. Because what I was trying to insinuate is the normal zoo situation is one in which what they see is not the reality. And so it sounds like in your situation they could see that, and that makes your zoo, if nothing else, far more honest at that time than the typical zoo about how the animals are really kept. Um, So thank you for sharing that. I didn't know that. I've never been to the Kentucky Reptile Zoo to see that. So that's really cool. Tiffany.
Uh, Same with reptiles, but in kind of a different context. I worked at an AZA facility in Pennsylvania that specializes in reptiles, Clyde Peeling's Reptiland. And what you see on exhibit is not at all what it looks like behind the scenes. It's a little bit different in the sense of other facilities, in the sense that Clyde Peeling's has actually traveling exhibits as well. So the majority of the animals housed at the zoo actually are not for display at that facility. So we have to have a lot of animals in limited space. So we didn't have rack systems, but we had visions, and a lot of the time that's kind of a lot of people are saying those are kind of phasing out, that's not enough space for animals. But the exhibits were beautiful fabrications made in-house, had live plants and substrates and everything, like water features. While upstairs they were being housed in Visions wire or just screen cages for a lot of geckos, hubs for colonies of frogs and things like that. And you could technically see that if you paid for a behind the scenes. But the general public did not, half of them didn't even know that we had a second floor that housed 3 times the amount of animals that you could actually see if you visited the zoo. So a lot, and have working in and being behind several facilities, the back end is bare bones. Give them what they need. If you're lucky, you have enough space to give them plants, substrate, an actual window to get sunshine instead of just a UV bulb, which half the time doesn't even work. Because I know my facility, the behind the scenes was climate controlled, so we didn't even have a single window. We worked in a cave, basically.
Yeah.
The same temperature at every time. We didn't know if it was raining outside unless it was pouring. So in that, especially with reptiles, it's get as many things in as little of a space as possible. Definitely a economy model habitats.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Destiny, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just thinking of what everyone said. I used to work at Chimp Haven, and like we would let the public come in 2 times a year, and they only got to see like the open habitats. They didn't ever get to see the behind the scenes, or they weren't allowed to see the enclosures that had the bars. We weren't allowed to show them like the inside, because it, from the public's view, like the inside is literally just concrete and then a wired shelf. We weren't allowed to take pictures, anything to show to the public. But then it was funny because like we would always say that we were very open, but we wouldn't like show that. We wouldn't show if there's any bars. They were only allowed to see the habitats. If the chimps were to get sick, we weren't allowed to really disclose what took them away. But like if one had a heart attack, we weren't really allowed to be like, oh, this is why. We weren't allowed to be like, these chimps came from former biomedically tested labs. Like it was very interesting how we had to keep so much a secret, but we were also open to the public.
Yeah, that's a great contribution because I mean that's really what we're getting at in this particular discussion. It's funny because we came here from Kensington, Kensington Farm, and this happens a lot, and this is actually kind of the fun of the discussion. But yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. The face is usually not what's behind the scenes. It sounds like Bjorn was maybe the only one of us that's experienced something different than that. I actually think that's really cool. Um, and I don't know, Bjorn was there. Bjorn has a little more input on that.
So one thing that I also wanted to add, and this is something that I see so prominently in the herpetoculture world, is an online presence and being aware of what you put online. And I feel like there's a lot of arrogance in this industry. And I feel like a lot of people try very, very hard to completely cover things up and never want to admit to mistakes. So like that was something that would still happen, right? If mistakes happened, if a snake got sick, Maybe there was an incident with an enclosure and the snake got injured. None of those things were talked about online. And that is something that drove me absolutely nuts. And, in the defense of like not putting that online is because you put that online and you immediately get slammed. But I also think that that is something that really inhibits the community in general. It really prevents people from learning from each other. And someone who worked at now two facilities, if I look at a facility and like everything looks perfect, everything's like immaculate, that in a sense is kind of sketchy to me because there's always stuff that happens, right? If you have a large collection of animals, there are always mishaps, things occur, accidents may happen, and moving forward, this is just something that I value really, really highly. I think one of the most important things we can do is really just be honest about that stuff, and share it with the community so we can just kind of all learn from each other. But yeah, the online presence is, I think, a very unique aspect to keeping nowadays, and I feel like I've seen that more with the online side of things and actually, in person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely does. Um, we're going to get back to this and particularly talking about things like how you outwardly express the the functions of the zoo and what's happening at the zoo uh, in a couple chapters from now. It's going to come up. Probably will come up 3 or 4 times, honestly. Uh, and I think there's a lot more to be said about that. So I think it's a really good point to bring up, Bjorn. All right, let's move on for the sake of time here. I want to get through, the vast majority of the text here. How do I have this laid out? Okay. So let's see, question 12. This is a bunch of stuff about acclimatization of societies and history. Let's just talk real briefly let's do question 13, um, just because it's interesting. So, what historical footprint did the American Acclimatization Society have? Someone tell me what that is and why it's significant. You know, I'm okay. Go ahead, Tiffany. Go ahead, Tiffany. I was going to make one of my bird students answer that question.
No, this only caught my attention because I recently did the Christmas bird count at my zoo.
Nice.
And it was the fact that they released starlings into the States. And it kind of made me giggle because I just read the report from that and it said that they had like half as many starlings counted this year, or I guess technically last year in December that they had before. And that made me laugh because we didn't count how many starlings were at Zoo New York because they were in the hundreds. So I was like, yeah, half your numbers were at Zoo New York because they're here eating
Uh,
our elk grass and ruining all the nice seed that we had when I think that was one day we didn't have snow on the ground. And so we
yeah.
were inundated with starlings. But also from my last zoo, they had bamboo growing. And oh my gosh, do they smell terrible? They're literally just in our bamboo, pooping on everything, ruining um, plants, and ruining people's experience of the facility. But are they considered an invasive species? I don't know anymore.
They
Um,
are they
I was
are
gonna say there's
uh
so many
quite
of them.
invasive.
Yes. So the fact that the society was the ones responsible for introducing them just made me laugh.
Yeah, and it's not so. And if you read some of the other societies they talk about, like in Australia and New Zealand, they did very similar things, and in some cases that were far more devastating to those ecosystems than starlings have been. The starlings are an invasive species, um, and there's been a lot of research on starlings. The idea of all these societies, they were trying to acclimatize different animals to new places, right, to wherever they were. And so they'd bring these animals in and try to get them used to this environment, essentially, and get them to be suited to living in these places for various reasons. And oh, Jasmine, go ahead. Do you have something to say about that?
I was just going to say, as someone who doesn't come from the zoo background, I come from the natural resources and the wildlife background. I have worked in invasive species position. And so to read all this, I was like, honestly, like I could have like gripped the iPad and like started shaking. I was so mad. Um, but there was a phrase that was brought up at one point, and they said a new indigenous species.
Yes, yes.
So to read some of these uh beginnings of such a thing, because I know I think Tiffany just brought up bamboo. Bamboo is also an invasive species that drives me nuts. I worked at the Ohio River Islands National Wildlife Refuge, and bamboo was one that I did have to deal with. Um, and so on like that's something that I'm learning to have to approach from a different light when learning about this zoo culture is the amount of times I read this and I'm like, oh, is that how this got here? Because birds will come in, they'll eat it, they'll fly out, and then they'll drop the seeds elsewhere and other things like that. So I thought that was extremely interesting. The phrase "new indigenous species" that sent me up a wall.
Yeah, the that was the idea at that time, right? We were ignorant. You have to understand it, as in many of these weird things we would take as like strange behaviors today, maybe, or unethical behaviors today. We were starting from a place of ignorance, of course, and so that's how we ended up there. I guess it goes to show how important not being ignorant is. You can prevent a lot of bad by not being ignorant. But they had never done this stuff before, so they didn't have a frame of reference. And I'm not making excuses for them. I'm just simply explaining the reality of the situation. Um, why did they want to bring it? Well, actually, let's move back for just a second because I think everyone here understands what the idea of invasive species is. Is there anyone that would like need some clarification? Because while I treat this class like a class where everyone has familiarity with some of the more common topics in conservation biology, I don't want to leave anyone behind. If you're sitting there going, "What the hell are you talking about?" This is a great time to say, "Hey, explain." We all on the same page with this? Okay. All right. So, they're innocuous things, usually introduced accidentally, sometimes like the starling quite intentionally. So what makes the starling an invasive species? What does it do? Is it just is it just annoying? Yes, Annabeth.
Okay, they are a little annoying, but it's okay because I think that they are beautiful even though that they're invasive, but they do
They are.
outcompete our native species.
Yeah, a typical issue with natives and the innocuous nature of invasives is the ability to outcompete um, because our natives evolved in this particular system, and so they're in balance with the things around them. And this other thing comes from outside of that system that is not checked by that system in the same way, and so it runs rampant on the system. So in the case of starlings, one of the things they do is attack and kill sapsuckers across their native range, and they also harm other native birds. Uh, Data on that varies, and there's some contention about the extent of that damage. And that's the reality. But they definitely do have a negative influence on some of our native bird populations. One that's been argued about is actually eastern bluebird. They definitely attack eastern bluebirds. Whether or not it's a significant level of damage that they do is debated to some extent. But yeah, they influence our native bird populations. I liked what Annabeth said, that they are beautiful even though they're invasive, because they are. If you've ever looked at starlings, like I get why Shakespeare was writing about them. And just to be clear, that's why the Acclimatization Society brought them. That's why they're here, is because Shakespeare wrote about them. Uh, some line, I couldn't tell you the line. I can't quote Shakespeare. I'm just not that good. But there's some line in Shakespeare that includes starlings. And there's some other birds as well that they wanted to bring over for the same reason. Ultimately, uh, Fortunately for us, this didn't occur. Tiffany?
Uh, Kind of a side question. What are they doing to try to decrease starling numbers? Is there really like a kind of nationwide thing, or we're just like, we're out of luck?
There,
Um,
truly, we are out of luck would be
okay.
there would be no conceivably reasonable way to
Okay.
to do this. Now, in the future, perhaps some uh, route of control might exist. Um, but right now, no. I mean, the only thing I will say is unlike our native birds, they are not protected. And if you want to go out with a BB gun and shoot every starling in your backyard, you can
You
do
say
that.
that. We
Uh,
did that at my last zoo. You say
yeah,
that as a joke, but I know people
yeah,
that do. And also
yeah.
like making noise so they can't nest, which never worked because they did anyway.
Yeah,
But
that
I
won't.
just didn't know if there was like an actual thing people are trying to do or not.
No, there's no concerted effort. So you were talking about the Christmas bird count. Okay.
Yes.
I do a minimum of 2 Christmas bird counts every year. Actually, Cleo, for the last 2 years, as she's one of my grad students in here, has done that with me for the last 2 years. So she knows. Uh, Cleo, so I do this with another guy. He's a mentor of mine named Dr. Ross Britton at West Virginia DAP. Cleo, what did Dr. Britton say when you asked how many starlings should I write down at the beginning of the Christmas bird count this year in Tigard?
Start at 500.
Yeah, yeah. Start at 500 because within a very short window of time, you will have 500 written down. Like it won't take that long to get to 500. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to say that was Parkersburg, I think it was, where we probably had 500 within the first 30 minutes of the Christmas bird count. There, if you're not hitting hundreds and hundreds of them, something weird is going on. They're so ubiquitous. Unless everyone everywhere in every state ran outside with their BB guns and started blowing them away, we would never be able to get them under control. It's just not going to happen. So no one's trying to really significantly control them. Yeah, Ryan.
Hi, so I'm not a big bird fan. What is the bird count? Like, what are you guys doing? Are you just like going out with a clicker and clicking every time you see a bird? Or I've never heard of this, so I'm like, what are they talking about?
Sure. So this is a historical count that is done every Christmas. It's done from basically um, very late in November. I can't remember the exact date until early January. So right now it's over, but there's this 6, 8 week window, and you drive around, and everyone has a territory within a set perimeter, and this is standard across all the points in the nation. And you literally write down every single species you see and how many individuals as you see them. The exact methods for that are a little bit different. So some people they'll do a thing where their territory is like a backyard feeder count, where they just count the things coming to their feeder. Other people are doing active searching. That's what I do and my crew does. We drive around like maniacs for about 15 hours looking for birds. Everyone does something a little bit different, maybe, but there's certain uh, ways that that's accounted for. So, for example, we keep track of our mileage and how many hours that we're out, and so that can be used to account for differences in effort between different groups, and then you get an estimate of the density of these different species of birds in your area. And since this is done all over the United States, and in fact, it's done in other parts of the world, you get this really cool picture every single winter of avian diversity. So that's what it is. And it's hosted by the National Audubon Society. There's over 100 years of data now using this same methodology. And I don't want to get too far off track. I will say there are problems with their methodology. As a matter of fact, I got in an argument with a guy that runs the whole thing for our region, and it was like, the way you calculate effort doesn't make any sense. But they've been doing it like that for so long that like they don't feel like they can even change that now. It's too late. 100 years of data, they're not going to change their ways now. So, but that's what a Christmas bird count is. I run one. I run the Tigard Lake Christmas bird count. And then I also participate in Parkersburg, and sometimes I get roped into participating in some other Christmas bird counts as well. Okay. But so ultimately, though, what we're talking about is the problem with these acclimatization societies. We got way off track there, and how they had some pretty negative influences by doing what they were doing. They end up bringing in these invasive species, things like starlings, and in some of the places where these societies were more successful, like Australia and New Zealand, they brought in really bad stuff like rabbits, for example, that had significant invasive influences on those ecosystems. Um, 842. I'm just trying to decide if I want to skip this question. Yeah, let's move on now to zoos in the 21st century. So I think when we get to, or is this one zoos in the 21st century? Where's Wilder Kingdom at? Did I accidentally copy and paste the same?
I think the book is posted twice, but I think the description behind it is accurate. But I think like the book is.
I just copy and pasted the same. Yeah. Okay. I think I see what I did. I'm not really sure. Okay. Yeah. So this is okay. This is yes. It's not zoos in the 21st century. This next thing is should be Wilder Kingdom. All right. So 117 was your forum question. That was the forum question. All right, so let's look at the question 18. Do you agree with David Hancock's idea that zoos expose human reverence for nature as well as their desire to dominate and smother its wildness? Getting deep and philosophical here. Caitlin.
I would definitely agree. So like what I wrote down, so I would love to say that I only see reverence for the natural world when I'm working at the zoo, and I do see that, but I also definitely see people who want to like control and smother for sure. For as many kids as I see in total wonder and awe at the cool animals in front of them, I also see adults throwing things at animals to get to them to move so they can be entertained. I have angry visitors coming up to me demanding I wake an animal up or get an animal that's resting behind the scenes out, which I would definitely say is wanting to control that animal like for their benefit and smother its wildness, and people who want to be able to throw food at the animals and get the animals to eat the things that they want the animal to eat. I would say that's all a form of smothering its wildness and like dominating and controlling the situation. So like I do see the reverence side from visitors, but I do see the other side as well. So I think those things definitely occur in modern zoos.
Okay, so from the perspective of the visitor, you can see both sides of this coin. Yeah, that's interesting. I can truly say, well, I have seen people do generally crummy things at zoos, slam on a glass or something like that. I have never seen anyone throw a thing at an animal, and that would enrage me. I would want to tackle them to the ground. Um, but I'm sure, yeah, like you said, I'm sure that happens. What about from the perspective of the zoo itself? Does the zoo itself embody both of these ideas, or just one? So does the zoo itself embody reverence? Does the zoo itself embody a desire to dominate nature? Tiffany.
I think it depends on what part of the zoo you're talking about, because on generally on the caretaker side of the zoo, the majority of us are in it because we respect the animals, we love the animals, we want to see them doing their best. A lot of reverence and respect for the animals. But especially in modern zoos, the higher up you get in the zoo field, the less animal experience there is currently. And you start getting into the business aspect of running a zoo. I don't necessarily think it's dominance per se, but there is definitely a money-making scheme. They want to make sure these animals are performing in a way that is going to bring in revenue. And there is definitely some people who only see it as a business and say, well, if that animal's not performing, then why do we have it? So and maybe that's a type of dominance of being, again, thinking of these animals as products, that they are to perform a service for us. Maybe they're not thinking of it as dominating the animal, but they are definitely trying to have it do something that they want in a specific way. And then, I mean, I have seen it also in a caretaker aspect, especially working with dangerous animals, especially young, up and coming zookeepers who have no experience and now starting to get into things. Um, Often because of like personalities around animals. I've seen this actually happen a lot because of Steve Irwin, which breaks my heart because he was also one of my heroes, but that they want to be able to be a personality like that, and there is a bit of a dominance in that. I've seen it happen with venom handling, that their main aspect is, well, I want to be able to handle these animals, not so much that I want to learn how to take care of them properly. I want to be able to go tell someone I hooked a king cobra today, without really acknowledging what a king cobra actually is.
Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah, and that's certainly, I think that would be a dominance thing for sure, right? Like I dominated, I challenged nature here and won, right? The king cobra could kill me, but I won. I took it
Yeah,
on and I did it.
similarly, one of the questions I was most asked while working with reptiles is, for some reason, if I wrestled the alligators. One, I'm 5'2", and that alligator's 8.5 feet long at minimum. But it's also like some of the worst people on the planet, old white guys, wanting to know if I was wrestling alligators or, wrestling Komodo dragons. And I'm like, no, because I don't need to. There's still kind of that backwoods thought of we're gonna go wrestle things, and I don't know why.
Do you know Dr. Loveman?
I don't.
Uh, I wish he was in this conversation right now because he may have at some point in his life wrestled some gators.
Oh, I
That's
have
why
wrestled it. I want to make it clear. I have wrestled a crocodile, not of my own accord.
a
But I have
crocodile.
had,
Wow.
it was a dwarf crocodile, so
Mm,
don't put me in too big of a box. I did have to pin a Komodo dragon as well. Um,
I,
with my bare hands, don't recommend. Please don't ever do that. Um, am I going to tell people that? No.
yeah, yeah,
And that's also kind of a thing where people be like, "Oh, I have this monitor at home and it bit me here and here and it scratched me here and here." And I was like, "Dude, I don't care. That's
yeah,
not impressive." And I think there's kind of that dominance thing where it's just like, "Yeah, I fought it, and
yeah. And
this
I
is what I
won.
got out of it. I got a cool scar."
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I this conversation had me kind of thinking that I think human dominance over animals and reverence for animals and nature kind of may have been built around the same time, like feeding off of each other in a way. Like we look at people who are like showing off their scars or like I did this, I did that, something that we might perceive as kind of negative, and then there's the other side of people that are like, that kind of sucks. You shouldn't do that, which probably built up the questions of, hey, should we be doing this? Why are we doing this? And I think reverence towards nature allowed for improvements of zoo history. Like we're obviously, again, I can't speak for all zoos, but we're not treating animals the way that they were treated 50, 60, 70 years ago. And that has a lot to do with people respecting nature, though a lot of that does stem from humans dominating nature. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, oh, yeah. I think those are great points. The Let's see here. Jasmine, you raised your hand. Go ahead. Jasmine, Kyle. We have
Yeah,
two Jasmines. It's confusing.
you can finish what you were gonna say.
Well, I was afraid you would have this. You might have the same thought as me.
Oh.
I'm gonna let you talk, and then if you don't, then I'll try to get back to that thought.
Okay. So I think a lot of people don't want to sort of take a step back. And I'm not like, I don't want to say that and sound like I'm pointing fingers at somebody because it's something that I've had to do a lot of thinking of with myself. I don't think that this would be the first or the last time that humanity's selfishness has turned into something good, like the zoos then to the zoos now. And I think about myself, like as a child, I knew animals went extinct. I knew these things. I didn't understand conservation. I wanted to work with animals because I thought animals were cool. That today, if I met an adult, that I might think that's a little bit selfish. I don't think it's bad, but I think it's a little bit selfish. Because at the end of the day, sometimes I just want to handle the animal. I'm doing it properly. I'm doing my best to make sure he's okay and not stressed out and well taken care of, but I still smile to myself at the end of the day because I'm appeasing that selfish little part of me that I'm working with animals. Would I call it dominance and smothering wildness? No. Would other people? Yes. Other people have told me to my face that I shouldn't have handled the bats. We shouldn't kill invasive species. They're part of the wild now, things like that. So I think it's a point of perspective, but I also think it's really important to realize that it's okay if there's a little bit of human selfishness to work with the wild. The wild is, as this course has sort of shown us, it's a very like nebulous definition. So I think that, yeah, zoos definitely straddle that fence of human reverence and that desire to dominate and the selfishness and smothering the wildness.
Well, I think you opened up a can of worms. Some hands went up, and that's good. No, that's good. It's really good. Go ahead, Bjorn. Your hand went up. Don't back down now. Don't be a coward, Bjorn.
I don't know. This is just a rabbit hole, and I think
It is. Yeah.
I really relate a lot to what Tiffany said, also just being in the snake industry and especially working with hots and venomous snakes. That's a huge industry where there is just so much ego. And you see it all the time, especially with like free handlers and people who aren't using proper tools or handling the snakes in a proper way. And it's always these old white dudes or these young macho energy guys that are very much, have that mentality of kind of just, dominating nature or, sometimes I think it can be covered up with saying it's like, oh, I want to be at one like with the snake, but it's really just an unnecessary method of handling. So it's like when we're caring for the animals, we try to do our best to be very, very safe about it, both for us and for the animal. So I think that there's a huge level of basically how you handle the animal and your mentality and the purpose behind that.
Yeah, I think I want to throw something in here on that just because this is the kind of thing that my wife and I would talk about. Like philosophically, there are some serious differences, and I mean, I think we all know this biologically in the way men and women approach doing things. And we all know that men tend to be, on average, greater risk takers. And I think that there might be a bit of what we might call toxic masculinity in that particular realm, where you're like, look how manly I am because I've handled the king cobra or whatever, like with my bare hands. It's sort of a show that is a show of dominance. I don't, to my knowledge, I haven't seen a lot of women be quite so irresponsible. So kudos to the ladies with their venomous animals. I'm sure some have, but in general, there does seem to be a gender difference in how we approach those things. Tiffany, your hands up.
Kind of leapfrogging off of both of those things. This has kind of become a big problem from the education perspective of zoos, with ambassador animals. As an educator who has worked with dozens of ambassador animals, there's a lot of argument about how we present animals in a way that it doesn't seem like we're just holding a cuddly thing. For example, I used to work with a Kinkajou, that was an ambassador animal who happened to also be cuddly. And the way we presented him was on our shoulders. We didn't have him on a stand or anything like that. And sometimes he would just get tired and he would go down and I'd end up cradling him like a baby. And people would kind of laugh at me when I tell them that he's a bad ambassador for his species, especially for Kinkajous because they are so often kept as exotic pets. And the whole reason that we had this Kinkajou was because he was bred in captivity. Now, granted, he was bred by someone who was very responsible, but still, for him specifically, was actually just for zoos, not for the pet trade. He only ever went to facilities. But the majority of Kinkajous that are kept as ambassador animals are actually surrendered pets or confiscated pets and things like that. So even just holding a snake around your shoulders doesn't seem like a lot to us at first. And then you're realizing, oh, I'm making this seem like something you could keep as a pet. And I've seen things like Komodo dragons in harnesses, big cats in harnesses, and there's questions of like, well, are we causing harm by how we are presenting these animals? Because a lot of people see that and they think, oh, I want it as a pet, when keeping things as pets is a form of dominance. I'm going to keep it in my house and it's going to respond to me and it's going to love me and I'm going to love it and it'll only ever love me, which isn't necessarily a great way of viewing animals. So that's a big kind. I know some facilities are even going away from ambassador animals entirely, where you can only ever see them on habitat or things like that instead of one-on-one encounters or a staff member handling them or things like that. Lots of facilities are asking questions about that.
Yeah, ambassador animals is like a whole nother can of worms, as it were. And I think we will talk more about ambassador animals at some other points in the semester. I do think that you're correct and that sometimes it can be problematic and it can actually in some cases be a representation of domination of a species, which is kind of right the theme we're on. That's very public. Taylor, don't unraise your hand, Taylor. It's too late.
Yeah. I did an internship for a month in Costa Rica, and it's like they have like laws against taking pictures with wildlife there. I don't know how like greatly enforced they are, but unless like you're a caretaker and like you're clearly like helping out with like a rescue or some type of conservation effort, like you're not allowed to take pictures with the animals because of the pet trade and being so bad. Specifically, I was like working with howler monkeys, and a lot of people, want to feed them and take pictures of them, but it's like highly discouraged in Costa Rica to do that because it's just so harmful.
That's good. That's probably a good policy. Great.
I just want to say one more thing about this dominance mentality. I feel like it's always Tiffany mentioned this earlier, but I feel like that's always with like dangerous or like weird animals, and it's why we see it in reptiles so much. Like people might want to like have, the cute animal as a pet, but I feel like nobody wants to like dominate a chinchilla, right? Like I feel like it really comes when it's, it's like a venomous snake or something that can actually pose a threat to you. That's personally when I feel like that dominance mentality really comes in.
I think that is ultimately true, Bjorn. That's because we wouldn't imagine having to dominate a chinchilla, right? Like, what is that? Where, what is the scenario where that comes into play, right? There's nothing impressive about dominating a chinchilla to the average person. Whereas if you dominate, I don't know, some large constrictor or something, that suddenly is impressive, let alone of something venomous or something big and predatory. Yeah, dominating a bunny rabbit, not impressing anyone. And so, yeah, you're not seeing people online be like, "Ha, look at this beautiful bunny rabbit that I've dominated. Aren't you impressed?" No one's saying that. Yeah, Abby.
Working at the zoo that I was at in Pennsylvania, I feel like we've also experienced some of that dominance from male versus female animals as well. Like you were talking about dominating the chinchilla. We had I don't want to say an incident, but we would do safari tours every day, and we had a male and a female lion together, and this one older white male went up to our male lion and crouched down and got in his face and was recording him, and he didn't like males as it was in the first place, so I advised him obviously not to get into this 400-pound carnivore's face, but he did anyway, and he like rushed the fence. He was growling, snarling at him, and he just sat there and continued to videotape him. But like our female, her name was Kiwi, our female lion came over and was rubbing up against the fence, and everybody was like, oh, that's so cute. But I feel like nobody would do that with the male other
Yeah,
than the female.
sure. Yeah, I can see that. Like if you were, another example might be like a large bull alligator, like a big male alligator, and being like, yeah, if you can wrestle the big bull male, that's a real sign of dominance, right? Like, um, yeah, there's probably some differences. It depends on the species of animal for sure, but when the male is the big bad dude in that species, dominating that individual is to some people apparently impressive. Um, Jess,
We have to go back in time and stop the alpha study from being so attractive and palatable for people. We have to go back in time and stop it. The whole alpha male thing, like
we have to go
we
back
can't.
really, really
That's what
far.
I'm saying. We have to go back really far and make it less like cool and enticing to people because I feel like that's a huge problem.
Well, I would say to you, and I don't want to get too off track, but this is kind of funny. That's really women's fault, right? Because you're picking your mates based on how alpha they are. So that's on you, okay?
Yeah, yeah.
He didn't raise his hand. He didn't raise his hand.
Um, so I think the one thing that no one said, which I thought was sort of the low-hanging fruit of this conversation, you guys had really great things to say about the idea of dominance in zoos, and actually, it's interesting. We talked far more about dominance than reverence, even though I think there's a lot of reverence to be spoken to. Um, we didn't mention the one thing zoos do, which is very clearly a depiction of dominance, and this is in every single zoo that exists, is we cage animals. There can be no more straightforward depiction of dominance. Every zoo does this. And so zoos create spaces which are beautiful and an homage to the greatness of those animals. That's reverence. But they are cages, right? They have created a captive from a typically, not always, a wild animal. So there is always in zoos, I would argue, both a reverence and a dominance happening. You can't not really see that until you have zoos that you can just walk around right by the lion without a cage. And I'm not going to that zoo. I don't know about you. So, something to think about. Let's go on to the next question. I think that was 18. Yeah. Okay, so we're getting into the editors of Wilder Kingdom, Mentir and Green have some this first chapter that really kind of covers what their philosophy was as they're writing this book. And so we get first into Mentir's idea of pragmatic preservation. So someone lay out what pragmatic preservation is. What is Mentir's idea? Did anyone read the chapter? Ryan.
I think kind of the overall theme of pragmatic preservation is that it's context dependent, and that there isn't really like one right answer on how to manage something and take care of it. Like moral principles are all going to be different. Um, sorry, I wrote a lot down. And one of the things he talks about is that nature isn't completely wild if it's untouched by man, and that sorry, I'm so mixed up right now. Essentially, it's context dependent, and conservation doesn't have to be one specific thing, and things can mean different things in different places. I hope that made sense to somebody.
Okay, I think you're touching on the fringes of what he was getting to. Tiffany, do you have something else there to throw in?
I literally wrote in my answer that his wording hurt my brain. He was very verbose, for no reason. I think if I understood him correctly, it's that conservation has to happen with humans and not to the exclusion of them. So at this point, humans will interact with the wild regardless. We cannot remove the human aspect anymore. So we need to really think about the practical ways we can involve humans in conservation, whether that is particular agricultural methods, things like that. So not necessarily giving the wild the use, but understanding that humans have to be included in the wild. There are enough of us. We're not going anywhere. Yes, we have damaged it, but now we have to find ways to kind of include us in those conservation methods. And that by having human development coexist with conservation will end up being more successful in the long run.
Okay. I would argue that I think Green hits on that more than Mentir does. Not that I think both of them believe that. I truly do. I don't think anyone could have a legitimate conversation about conservation and not allude to that to some extent. So, I think Ryan had their hand up next.
I didn't mean to have it up. Ignore me.
Bjorn. Okay. Bjorn, you have something you want to throw in?
Yeah, I think this term pragmatic preservation, it just really kind of leans into the gray area surrounding all of these issues. So instead of wanting people to kind of lean on a singular pre-described opinion, he really wants to utilize this phrase to open up discussion surrounding decisions and kind of a cost benefit analysis. And I think a great way that he described his opinion was his response to people asking whether or not zoos are good or bad. And he said something along the lines of like, well, some zoos are better or they have more good than bad, right? And so it's not like a yes or no, yay or nay. It's very much like there's a lot of gray area surrounding this. And, even if things are ultimately good, there might be some negative consequences of that. And we need to be able to open ourselves up to have these conversations openly to actually figure out, what the costs and benefits are of these decisions that we're making in order to, come up with conclusions that way.
Okay. So you're talking about costs and benefits, and I think that's hitting on an important part of his philosophy, and that is the practical, this is what we're talking about by pragmatic, the practical ways in which we think about conservation and the wild and nature in general are maybe the most important. It's not to Mentir, I should say. It is not a universal moral principle that should guide our conservation decision making, but the practical application of doing conservation. And a cost benefit analysis certainly would be, a part of that kind of an approach. Jasmine, you had your hand raised.
I was just gonna say that she was right. Like both of these dudes love the sound of their own, not the sound of their own voice, but I guess the way their own narrative sounded. So to me, Mentir, it was an approach to protecting nature that acknowledges justifications beyond the intrinsic value of nature. So the part that leaves the worst taste in my mouth, applying dollar signs to things that we shouldn't, ideally, but that's not how it works. Shaking hands with legal men, shaking hands with politicians, saying yes to things that we don't want to do because at the end of the day, that is going to be what provides us the ability to protect the idea that we're trying to protect here. Um, all the yellow tape, all the paperwork, all the unfun stuff. That's the pragmatic aspect of preservation. I think that was what he was trying to get at, from what I could tell.
Yeah, I mean, the point that you hit on at the beginning, not associating what we should do with the intrinsic value of life, but rather in what is practical. That's what it's all about. That's why it's pragmatic. It's kind of interesting. So I actually have this paper sitting here beside me that you all did not read, but my applied conservation undergraduate class read today. The Thoreau ideal as a unifying thread in the conservation movement. This guy would hate Mintier. They have diametrically opposed views on why we should do conservation. I might post this paper just for, I think it's worth reading. I enjoyed reading it. I don't necessarily agree with it, even though I want to agree with it. But what the editor, this is an editorial, so what the editor here was saying in this paper is essentially the exact opposite. That the reason we should do conservation is explicitly because life has an intrinsic value to it. And he essentially calls out modern conservationists as you might say being weak or being cowardly because they're too afraid to come out and say it. And they want to apply this practical idea to everything when the reality is, at least according to this author, that we just simply have a moral responsibility and life has an intrinsic value. So, and that's the end of the story, and everything else is a moot point. This has problems, even though philosophically I am in total alignment with this author. Bjorn, you're shaking your head no. I want to know why. I'm calling out Bjorn explicitly. Bjorn's going, you can't make that face in the camera and not tell me what you're thinking, Bjorn.
Well, I don't like it. They're interesting discussions, but I don't know why these things always have to be mutually exclusive. Like we can say that things have intrinsic value and we should protect them because of that, but there's also a pragmatic way to do it, and there is also the, perspective that we should protect the ecosystem because we also live in this world. And so I feel like this discussion of like, intrinsic values versus like the pragmatic, I feel like this is an unnecessary debate in some ways, just because I don't know why they have to be mutually exclusive from each other.
They do not, Bjorn. They do not. So this author, and while I really again enjoyed this and like his general moral, his ethic, his ethic, he's maybe not coming from a maybe an entirely rational place, because if you really do believe in the intrinsic value of life and you really want to protect it, the only way to do that is to be incredibly practical, put money signs, put dollar signs on things and convince people through economic and other pragmatic sorts of means to contribute to conservation, right? That would be one way. Or to create the church of conservation and send your missionaries of conservation into the world and hope you can convert people. One of those things seems like it will be much more effective than the other. And if you really care about that intrinsic value, you have to go with the practical. So in your ethic, like just like in my ethic, in my personal ethic, I believe deeply and spiritually about the intrinsic value of life. And I would be happy to argue with anyone who wanted to argue about that with me. Life has a value independent of any human evaluation. I truly believe that. But I know that I can't just go out and spread the gospel of that. And I'm not going to get a bunch of millions of people to follow me and just all be like, yay, Dr. McKinney knows his stuff. Let's all be conservationists now. That's not going to happen. But if I go out and I say, we should protect this, and here's the reasons why, this is why it'll affect you, I can convince people, right? That's how you did that. So the ends justify the means in this case. I'm going to approach this from a way that isn't necessarily the way I want to approach it. I would like to just tell everyone, hey, life has intrinsic value, and they just believe me. I'm going to approach it a different way, though, and I'm going to get the end result that I want to get, which is conservation. Caitlin, you had your hand up and I got a little long-winded there. I'm sorry. You still want to contribute?
Yeah, I was just gonna say a very similar thing to what you said, in that like within this group, us in this class, I would say all of us likely have feelings leaning towards intrinsic value. Like we all value the natural world, and that's likely why we're in this program. But I think that it's naive to think that intrinsic value alone can make an impact. I think you have to be pragmatic, like you were saying, because not everyone holds our viewpoint. And in order to make a difference, you have to be pragmatic to get things done, or even to convert those people. Like you have to make a case for what you believe in. You can't just say to everyone, like, you should value it just because it exists and as it is. Like, that's not how everyone feels. That's not going to get through to everyone. You have to meet people where they are, and you have to like make a case for your argument.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yes, we're on the same page, Caitlin. We're on. And I hope all of us are on that page. I can say that if you have another perspective, I would love to hear it. If you were like, no, this Thoreau guy, not Thoreau, this is not Thoreau. Okay, this is the editor of a paper talking about Thoreau's ideas. If this editor, he's right and you're wrong, I would love to hear your argument for that, because I think I can thoroughly thrash the heck out of your argument pretty easily. And I don't love that. I truly, truly wish I could make a YouTube video and post it, talk about my perspectives on the intrinsic value of life, throw it into the ether. Millions of people would watch it and go, oh, he's right. I've been doing it wrong my whole life. And they would just change. That would be great. That's not realistic at all. So, all right. I'm very passionate about that subject. Okay. That's Mintier. So Mintier's idea of some pragmatism is good. I don't necessarily agree. So he sort of steps away from intrinsic value in his discussion a bit. He kind of separates himself. He sort of recognizes it, but I guess maybe not to the extent that I do. And so I don't know that I fully agree with everything Mintier is saying, just because I still think that as the conservation biologist myself, that has to be my underlying ethic. Does that make sense? But then like how I approach getting other people on board, can be quite different. Okay. Let's see what question 20 is. I think we're going to skip 20 and go to 21, because we're going to talk about scholarly focus on zoos repeatedly in this class. So let's go with explain the idea of positive duty versus negative duty to captive and wild animals. How do these different combinations of factors? Yes, Destiny.
So for this question, I put a positive duty will involve actively ensuring animals' well-being. So for captive animals, this is providing care, safety, enrichment, conditions for natural behavior. A negative duty would refer to refraining from harming or interfering. So for like wild animals, humans should just leave them be. But positive duty for wild animals would be assisted migration or captive breeding due to climate change and habitat loss, while negative duties for zoo animals by limiting unnecessary human manipulation on behavior.
Perfect answer, Destiny. Yeah. So positive is where we have to take action, essentially, right? We have to in some way ourselves do something. And a negative is a duty where we have to not do something, essentially, whether or not we need to intervene in care or management of wild population versus not intervene. And so we have this set of duties both to we tend to think of having positive duties for captive animals and negative duties for wild animals. That's the general way people think about this. We have a positive duty to take care of the animals in the zoo, and we have a negative duty to not intervene in natural processes with wild animals. But the fact is, we really have both sets of duties for both captive and wild animals. And that is the crux of what this question is getting at. Man, we only got about 30 minutes left. Skip Roderick Nash, even though he's an important fellow. Let's go straight to Green's argument. Because I know I saw Bjorn in the hallway today and he told me he had things to say. So I know there will be some things to talk about with this one. And I don't know how long it'll take. And then maybe we can use Green's argument and then to talk a little bit at the same time about question 23, which is your personal perceptions on the idea of what is wild. So, what is Green's position? So we have Mentier's position on pragmatic preservation. What does Green have to say about his sort of philosophy on conservation and on wildness? Taylor.
I think I'm not positive, but I think what he was, kind of concerned about, or like his belief was, is that the environment is wilder. Like the idea that the environment is wilder is less about like human presence. Like he's like okay with human presence, but kind of like opposed to what Nash was kind of thinking. We didn't go over that, but Nash was kind of like talking about like the true wild. And he doesn't think like necessarily the true wild, like he doesn't really like kind of think about that. He thinks human presence okay, but he's like more concerned about like local appropriate ecology and evolution diversity being there. So he like wants the animals that are supposed to be there, but like humans can like be there as well. I'm like, that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. So there's a really important discussion of humans here that is fundamental to Green's argument. Jasmine, you're nodding your head yes. You want to expand on that?
Okay. Inherently, Green is not wrong that at this point in time and at previous points in time, humans are a part of the ecosystem too. Our power is a lot bigger than, say, like an isopods, but like we are a part of the ecosystem. But Green to me was like a total goober, honestly.
You've just devastated Bjorn. You guys are going to have
I'm
a fist fight later.
sorry.
Okay.
So
Well, explain
I
your
did.
okay, let me clarify one thing first, Jasmine. So what Green is saying is that humans have evolved and become what we are through fully natural processes. And so our typical vision of the wild, and this is why we talk about Nash first typically, is that humans aren't wild. Okay, that's like the standard thought. When we talk about the wild, humans are not a part of it. And he's saying that's ridiculous. We are literally a product of wild evolutionary processes, right? Okay, so Jasmine, tell me why you think he's a goober.
Um, and I don't even know if it's his full idea. It might just be his way of delivery. When he was describing himself as a born-again predator because he started deer hunting, as someone who grew up hunting and fishing and stuff, it's like, yes, we are a part of the ecosystem. My family, like, we're poor West Virginians. Like, we would hunt, so we would have food in the freezer. But the way he was like describing it, I was picturing him like out in the wild, like holding the deer heart up and like and picturing himself as a part of this. And then he revealed that he had been a medic and a soldier and had been eating meat prior. And I don't, maybe I missed something while reading, but I don't know where the transition happened for him because he also was describing like snakes and primates having this ancient baggage.
Yeah.
I don't know. He
Where,
was giving actually the macho man like alpha dude mentality earlier that we were kind of discussing to me, the way he was discussing these things. While I don't, like I said, I agree. Humans are a part of the ecosystem. We do not need to be separate of the wild.
so
But the
okay.
way he was delivering the information, it was just like he was kind of a goober to me, and I was struggling to follow his process of writing. So maybe it's because the introductory paragraph was sort of like in a very opinionated, like they'll like tighten the reins in future paragraphs. But I guess that's a heads up from me to you. Green's writing process kind of loses me at points, even
That's
if
okay.
I do
That's okay.
kind of agree with what he's saying in ways.
everyone's writing's not going to resonate with everyone. So I get that. I actually really enjoy Green's writing, even though I don't like his perspective on intrinsic value. I like his other perspectives quite a lot, and I actually enjoy his writing. So okay, now Bjorn, before you go into off the deep end, the first thing I want to know, because Jasmine brought this up, is what is he talking about when he talks about snakes and primates? Start there.
So I think a big thing that so Harry Green, he's a very, very well-known herpetologist. He was actually somebody that I met who told me actually to go to the Kentucky Reptile Zoo where I ended up working for a couple of years. And so he's researched a lot about, the human perspective on snakes and also kind of what, Tiffany was saying. There are a lot of people who, have an inherent fear or just urge to kind of kill snakes. So I think he was really just kind of diving into why that was and kind of going into the history of this also dominance mentality and why people do have that mentality, what might have, what in our genetics and the history of our evolution might have caused this to be such a common thing within humans. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, he's speaking to our evolutionary uh, ancestry and the struggles we would have had with those animals, not even when we were in the genus Homo, right? Like much, much longer before that, and how that might be reflected in our deepest cognitive responses to certain animals today. He's establishing us as wild through evolution in this context. Okay, Bjorn, continue with your deep thoughts on Harry Green. I'm excited. Um, Go for it.
Oh, I don't even know what to say now. Where to begin?
How did you feel about this? I know you told me you were excited in the
Yeah.
hallway. I want to know how you felt about this.
So I really liked it, and I think a part of it I also connected. Like I also grew up in the country, but I started hunting after undergrad. So after undergrad, like I dove really heavy into archery and really started hunting, and so I kind of really related to what he was saying in the story. And I think the fact that you grew up that way, Jasmine, I think that's awesome. But I think it's important to note that the majority of people do not grow up that way. The more modernized society becomes, the more separate people feel they are from nature. And so this mentality of a born again predator, um, I guess from my perspective and also my experiences, it's reconnecting yourself to nature. It's reconnecting yourself to the food that you're eating. Like you're out there, you're partaking in the food cycle. And so I think that, what he is really getting at is that, a lot of people nowadays see humanity and people completely separate from wild. And that was his way of just saying that we are still very, very much a part of it and we can still interact with it. And I think that kind of goes into his definition of wild as well. He had one quote that I really liked, where he said it wasn't wild does not necessarily mean an absence of humans, but more an area where humans engage mindfully with the ecosystem. So at a place, where humans go out there and they hunt, it's not like you see a person there and you're like, oh, this space is like no longer wild. But it's how we kind of interact with that ecosystem and how we perceive ourselves kind of within that spot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. Thank you. So, there's I think even a bit more here to what Green is saying. But it goes back to the things we've already been talking about here. He's saying, think about the just sort of genus Homo dominated history of the world. In that time, even just the Homo sapiens dominated history of the world. In that time, we have tremendously influenced what is wild. If we want, and the wild is shaped by us now, even today, even the wildest parts of the world have echoes of our impacts. Okay. And so to truly see what is wild and to say it is completely different from what is human, we would have to go back to pre-Homo sapiens history to even see what that was. And so it's literally preposterous to say that. Um, and if you think about, if I said, if I said I want to go a trip and I want to see a wild place, where's a place that you might go to see the wild? Where might you go? Anybody, it doesn't matter. Jasmine, where
Wilderness
would you go?
area.
Oh, okay, a wilderness area. Do you think you'd be the only person in the wilderness area?
No,
No.
but they're
Uh,
large enough that I might not see another person, but I know that that's not the inherent hinge upon what defines a wild area.
yeah,
Um,
sure.
I
Uh,
think I just want to I agreed with a lot of what Green was saying. I just think that his writing was like romanticizing it in a way that it felt almost like a purple prose or like I don't know. It was hard for me to get to his core of thought. I had to reread his part a few times because of the way that he wrote this. The ancient baggage, I understood that he meant, the long history of like primates and snakes and where he
mhm.
was coming with that. But for me, when I first read the words ancient baggage, it was kind of like when I read the new indigenous species. I was just taken aback. I was like, I don't know if I would call it baggage, but I think it's just his writing style that I'm not like clicking with because I did agree and understand his point of view. It's just there was this I don't know. But like Bjorn said, I have to remember that a lot of people don't have the upbringing where to me it feels like second nature that like we are, I guess, a part of it. I didn't grow up in like a big city or anything. Like I said, I've grown up to a few people. I've grown up in a one stoplight county in West Virginia. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, Caitlin, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, when you asked like if you were going to go to a wild place, where would you go? That was something I thought about in that question, like what does the wild mean to you? And for me, the more I kept trying to think of a place, the more I thought of how every place I was thinking of is inherently impacted by people. And
Yeah,
like even the wild places I think of are kind of touristy wild places. Like
yeah,
I think of national parks and like our national parks do have wild animals, but like our behavior even affects those animals. Like those animals are more habituated to people because they are kind of touristy destinations. And I tried to like think outside the United States and like people will go on African safaris, but those animals are habituated to seeing jeeps. Like all of the places I instinctively reach to as like, oh, well, that's a wild place is very impacted by human interaction.
yeah. And that's what I was trying to get to. When you think of these places, you might think of like Yellowstone, and it's like, have you seen the lines at Yellowstone? So like, there's like so many people sometimes, and we call that wild. Is it? How wild is it? It's pretty darn wild. But it is influenced by people, and sometimes to a tremendous extent. And we are just a part of that wildness. Ryan.
Yeah, so I feel like I've thought, like listening to other people talk about this, I'm starting to question, like, can we really call humans wild? And if we can, is it all humans wild? Because I mean, I'm sitting in a cozy apartment on my computer. I'm not, living off the land. So I would say people living in like indigenous places like that are considerably more wild than I am, with my electricity and my Wi-Fi and everything. And I think that goes for wildness as well. Like to me, it seems more of a scale of how wild are you? And I think I wrote down something wildness varies, or it can vary based on the dependency of non-natural processes. Like, for instance, with humans, how am I more wild than somebody else? Well, I have all these non-natural processes that are helping me survive. And I think that's kind of how I've been thinking of the wild and how much of this is just you, or how much are you dependent on humans or other things like I don't know, everything somehow related to humans. But I think that kind of shows that there's a scale of whether you're wild or not wild. I don't think they're two very separate things. I think it's all merged.
Okay, I get what you're saying. You would say an Aboriginal tribesman is more wild than you, for example. Someone living in a hut with a spear is more wild than you are in your house with your television.
Well, yeah, and you can think about that as like zoo animals as well. For instance, I wrote about it in my intro. I have 4 wild caught, wild born spider monkeys. Genetically and biologically, they're the same as the spider monkeys in the wild, but behaviorally they're different because they're dependent on me and the zoo and the resources that we provide versus the spider monkeys in the wild that are dependent on nature, while there's also influence from humans, but it's not as severe as what we're giving them in a zoo, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. But can you permit me to just state a counterpoint? Would that be okay? I don't want to offend you, and I'm not, because
Yeah,
I'm
go
not
for
like,
it.
I'm not trying to argue with you. I
Hey
just
man, I'm
want to
here to
present.
learn.
Yeah, good. That's what we're here for. So here's my counterpoint. Uh, Everything in your house, literally the walls, what are they made out of?
Wood, I
Yeah,
suppose.
yeah. At least a significant portion of your house is probably made out of wood. I would think, or other natural substances. The things that run the electricity, the copper that runs to the wires in your house. Where's it come from?
The earth.
The earth.
The ground, yeah.
Everything that we have, we might not live in huts. We live in really nice huts. Everything we have still comes from nature. There is nothing that you can find in any space, even things that we call synthetic. The chemicals that we use to create those synthetic things came from nature. We cannot create things that do not ultimately come from nature if you zoom in far enough. So the counterpoint might be that it's not actually any different. Those animals in captivity that depend on your giving them things are still depending on nature. In fact, you are from nature. And so that would be the counterpoint. And I'm not saying that that's the right perspective. I'm saying that there is a counter perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I hear what
Tiffany,
you're saying.
Tiffany, what do you think?
Uh, kind of along that, and I realized this was kind of what I was trying to write in my answer. I've often used wild as a way to say something kind of about like temperament. Like just because an animal is in captivity doesn't necessarily make it less wild. That is still a wild animal. Yes, we're taking care of it. It relies on us. But it doesn't owe anything to us. If we disappeared, it would still be fine. Like for example, I have a rehabilitated turkey vulture I care for, and she acts the same way that a wild turkey vulture would if I weren't taking care of her. She just is incapable of flight now. In fact, she's feistier than any wild turkey vultures I've ever stumbled upon. She's a menace. But that's also what I tried to tend, because I inadvertently at Zoo New York, I'm actually teaching zoo tech students, so people that are hoping to get into the zoo career. That part of this is that what I kind of said is wild is kind of the opposite of domestication. That just because we are housing them doesn't change them in any way. That yes, our mountain lion was raised by humans, but he's still capable of killing me. And if he had a reason, he wouldn't hesitate to kill me. And that just because I'm growing belladonna in my garden doesn't make it any less toxic. So kind of that is that we haven't changed it in such a way that it no longer like domesticated, like they rely on me. That pugs that we bred for pets, they don't have a place in natural environment without humans. So that was kind of my perspective. I always try to tell people that yes, I am gloving this raven, but she's still gonna act like a raven. That I haven't changed her essence in any way.
Part of what you were saying actually is very much tying into what Ryan was saying, that like a thing that's not wild maybe depends on us. Uh, and that works in a situation in which you separate us from the wild. But if you include us in the wild, then I don't know that it does anymore, because that means they're still depending on the wild if we are the wild, right? Now, again, I'm not actually arguing this as though it is my particular core belief as much as I like to make sure in these kind of discussions that we see the different sides of the argument. I think that's the most valuable part of these discussions. Um, and I think defining wild has been something that has caused a tremendous amount of discussion for as long as we've been thinking about it. And it coming to a definition that we can all agree on is actually really, really difficult to do. Yes, Bjorn.
I think one of the toughest parts about that, and we kind of touched on both of these, but in my response, I kind of wrote that there are essentially two definitions of wild. Like there is wild when you're referring to a place, like what does that mean? But then there's also wild when you're referring to the nature of something. So it's like if we see here at West Liberty, we have deer walking through campus all the time. I wouldn't necessarily call this the wild, but to me, that deer is still wild, right? So if I'm looking at that deer, I'm using the term wild in a different way. And for me, at least, I think what's really tricky is I wouldn't really know how to connect those two definitions.
So let me ask you something about the deer. So for those of you who don't know the West Liberty area up here, there's a place called Oglebay. Oglebay has about 100 jillion, and that's a slight exaggeration, but it has a ridiculous number of wild deer. But these deer are incredibly accustomed to people. You can walk right up to many of these deer. Uh, the the deer here on campus, which is just a 10-minute drive away from the zoo, aren't really that different. There are some that are more skittish. There are some you can get really comically close to before they will actually run away. Um, Now, Bjorn, you say those are still wild deer. What quality makes them wild if I can get 20 yards from them before they decide that I'm too close?
Really good question.
You know
Um,
what? Let me throw out what I think is going through your mind, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. Is it that they are not uh, bound in any way? They are free to move through any amount of wildness or not so much wildness. Is freedom what makes them wild? If we took that same deer and that same behavior but put them behind bars, we wouldn't call them wild anymore, would we?
I don't know. I don't think we can equivalent like habituated to domesticated, and I feel like that's kind of where this conversation is going. So like they're very much used to people, but they're still an animal that's very, very connected to the outdoors and the ecosystem. And yes, they can kind of range where they go, but I would still argue like if you cage that animal up, like I would never say that that animal is not wild, and that might just be the zoo educator in me also trying to deter people from wanting to keep them as pets. But I think that is also a pretty big distinction. Like in my mind, humans being a part of nature means that we will kind of have this relationship with animals, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not wild. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that was a
Okay.
really good answer. I just wanted to see if that's where your mind was going with it. If the freedom of the animal was tied somehow to its conception of wildness. Yes, Tiffany.
I don't know if anyone else thought this, but when you asked that, the first thing I thought of was that it's not in my house. And that's why it's wild, is because it doesn't live with me. And therefore, because like a cardinal outside is still wild. It could be in my backyard, it could be on my porch. It is still wild. But the fact that it does not live in my dwelling with me, that's kind of what I thought of, is that I'm not the one caring for it. It doesn't live with me. It's wild. And even in the zoo, yes, it lives at the zoo. I care for it at the zoo. It is not in my house with me. Therefore, it is wild. I don't know if anyone else had an inkling like that, but that's where my head went.
So that would apply essentially to then saying that domesticated animals are not wild animals. Does that sound fair, or is that incorrect?
That is a lot of the reasoning I said for wild, is that part of it is we have inherently changed animals to the point that they no longer, in some cases, resemble their uh, wild. I don't know what other word to use. Their counterparts that are living outside of human care. We've also, to the point that we've actually caused uh, their initial counterparts to become extinct. And that point, and some cattles and some sheep and things like that, yeah, we have domestic rabbits, but then wild rabbits, non-domesticated rabbits are actually doing poorly and things like that. So yeah, my definition of wild was undomesticated. So I wouldn't consider my albino hognose snake, who's currently living in a tank, wild. Uh, I wouldn't consider the dogs I grew up with wild, especially because they only went outside when I took them outside. They didn't live on land. There might be some cases on farms where there's very little contact with them. And I know there are some farms where they literally are just there to live, and not necessarily for production of any kind, where that's kind of a gray area. But yeah, I said domestication kind of smothered their wildness.
It's interesting. We're going to, Bjorn, I'm going to let you talk for like 60 seconds and then we got to stop it because we got a couple minutes left to wrap everything up. So go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that was a really, really interesting point you saying that's like as soon as you bring that animal into your house, like that kind of changes things. Because that was also going through my head when McKinney, you were having your conversation with Ryan about, what's around us. And in my head, I was sitting there listening to that, thinking, it's like, well, we essentially control our environment. Like it doesn't really matter what happens tomorrow. It doesn't matter really what the weather is. I mean, to a certain extent, right? To a certain extent, but it's like right now it's 9:47 at night and I have like lights on. And so as soon as you also bring an animal into your house, now you're controlling its environment. And so that animal itself might not necessarily be in the wild, but it still has wild instincts. But that's also, I think like the gradient of wild that Ryan was talking about. I definitely agree with that. And I think for me, it's like if I go camping, I'm probably going to go to bed when the sun goes down, and being directly connected with nature that way, that is something that I think, enters my definition of what is wild.
Just writing something down here. So I think that's a really, really good thought. I mean, all the thoughts have been really good, but I like that. That's a really good place to stop. So, um, one perception of what makes something wild might simply be if its life processes are controlled uh, by processes outside of artificial hands. In other words, like you said, we control the environment itself, and that's not that doesn't follow normal environmental processes. Like we can be warm when it's 5 degrees outside right now, for example. And if the animals can be too, then uh, we have maybe removed them from a category of wildness. Though that has problems because we can do that for zoo animals that we would want to call wild animals. So it's still a question, certainly up for debate. Do you call the elephants in their big sheds with controlled environments wild, right? By your definition or by your idea of wildness, because that is human controlled environment. So, but I think it's a really good place to stop. Obviously, we did not come to a perfect consensus on what wild means either. From the perspective of individual animals or from places, whether a place is wild or not. And quite frankly, I don't think anyone anywhere has come to a consensus on that because there's, as you can see, a lot of different perspective that can be brought into this discussion. But I think this was a really excellent first night for this class. I wasn't sure I was going to work with as many people. Last year I had 4 people in this class, and it was like pulling teeth to have a conversation sometimes. So thank you all for your meaningful contributions. Everyone at some point tonight contributed, I think, meaningfully to the conversation, and I appreciate that. And hopefully everyone learned something, or at least everyone has in their mind some things that were they were like, I never thought about that before. Now I need to really think about how I feel about that, because that's the whole point of the class. Um, I know, just as a couple points of business that need taken care of for the class, real quick here. I know the chapter for zoos in the 21st century is not up on module 2 yet. I have to get my book PDF into a PDF editor and extract that chapter. I can't really just post the entire book up. I would like to do that because it would make my life a lot easier. But I will tell you that you can find that book if you look hard enough on the internet. That's what I'll tell you. I will not tell you exactly how to do that, but it exists. And this video, I forgot to, I thought I had hit record when we started. Apparently I did not. So I started recording at about question 8. I will post this recording if you want to revisit it to think about some of the things we talked about later on. It's mostly for the people that couldn't be here so they can watch all of our discussion and then go on. They have to write extra responses. You don't have to do that because you were here tonight and you contributed. So good for you. And then I would finally just end with, does anyone have any questions right now for me? Not deeply philosophical things like what is the wilderness, but just general questions about the class. We good? All right. We'll end with that, and thank you again, and I will see you all next week on Tuesday.